The Paracel Islands at 10:17 a.m. held a specific kind of political weight that no other disputed feature in the South China Sea carried in quite the same way. The Spratlys were a multilateral argument. Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Taiwan, and China all claimed portions or all of the feature group, and the complexity of those overlapping claims had produced decades of diplomatic documentation, legal proceedings, and the specific gridlock that accompanied disputes with too many parties to resolve. The Paracels were different. A bilateral dispute with a specific historical event at its center, January 1974, when the plan seized the Western Paracels from the Republic of Vietnam in a brief naval engagement, taking islands that Hanoi continued to claim as Vietnamese sovereign territory under UNCLOS. China occupied the Paracels. Vietnam claimed them. The gap between those two facts had been persistent, documented, and periodically expressed through CCG harassment of Vietnamese civilian vessels, encounters rarely observed by a third party with documentation capability. At 10:17 a.m. on this particular morning, the third party with documentation capability was present. The U.S. destroyer had been conducting a freedom of navigation operation in the Paracel Island area since 0800, transiting in a pattern that kept it within 12 nautical miles of Woody Island, the largest Paracel feature, Chinese-occupied and fortified, the administrative center of China's Sancha City designation for the island chain. The transit was lawful, conducted under UNCLOS Article 58, and was the specific kind of freedom of navigation operation that the United States conducted near disputed features to contest excessive maritime claims without acknowledging the legitimacy of the claimant's occupation. At 10:17 a.m., the contact picture changed in a way that had not been in the morning's tactical brief. The Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel had been logged since 0941 as Vietnam Coast Guard, probable patrol mission, bearing 162, range 12 nautical miles, southwest transit. It was a standard patrol profile for the Vietnam Coast Guard, a medium-sized cutter, approximately 2,400 tons, one of the newer vessels that Vietnam had acquired in the past decade to project presence in waters it claimed but could not control. At 0941, it had been southwest of the destroyer's position and proceeding toward the Paracel Center without incident. At 10:17 a.m., the CCG vessel that had been logged since 0830 as China Coast Guard bearing 235 holding, left its holding position and began moving east at 14 knots. Simultaneously, the planned frigate that had been holding 8 nautical miles north of Woody Island began moving south at 16 knots. 3 contacts moving simultaneously toward a converging point. Bridge, CIC. Significant contact picture change. CCG vessel bearing 235, range 7.2 nautical miles, now east at 14 knots. This is the Haijing 5302, 3,400 tons, previous holding position near the Paracel southwest approach. Planned frigate bearing 038, range 11 nautical miles, now south at 16 knots. Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel bearing 155, range 8.3 nautical miles, continuing southwest at 8 knots. Projected geometry. All 3 contacts converge at a point approximately 5 nautical miles southwest of our current position, approximately 6 nautical miles from Woody Island in approximately 19 minutes. 3 contacts converging on a point. The Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel was transiting southwest toward the Paracels, toward waters Vietnam claimed. The CCG vessel was approaching from the southwest. The planned frigate was approaching from the north. In 19 minutes, the Vietnamese vessel would be between the CCG and the PLAN frigate in disputed waters near the Chinese-occupied island, with 2 Chinese government vessels closing from different directions. The officer of the deck had the geometry. He reached for the intercom. At 10:19 a.m., the captain stepped onto the bridge. He looked at the contact picture for 20 seconds. The Vietnamese vessel at 8 knots, proceeding toward the convergence point. The CCG at 14 knots, approaching from the southwest. The planned frigate at 16 knots from the north. The destroyer positioned with the convergence point approximately 5 nautical miles southwest, inside observational range, inside the geometry of the encounter, present and documented. I have the con. He had read the South China Sea Patrol brief for this area. He had read the Vietnamese Coast Guard encounter reports filed with ASEAN Maritime Coordination over the past 3 years. He knew what the CCG's tactical library included for Vietnamese patrol vessels near Chinese-occupied features: water cannon deployment, close maneuvering to force course alterations, radio demands to depart Chinese sovereign waters, and, in documented cases, physical hull contact categorized as unintentional by China and deliberate by Vietnam. The Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel was going to encounter the CCG and the PLAN frigate in approximately 19 minutes. The U.S. destroyer was 5 nautical miles away. He had no obligation under any formal alliance framework to intervene between Chinese government vessels and the Vietnamese Coast Guard near Chinese-occupied islands. The United States had a comprehensive partnership with Vietnam, not a mutual defense treaty. The diplomatic complexity of the Paracel dispute, the 1974 seizure, Vietnam's claim, China's occupation, did not resolve itself cleanly in either direction. What he had was a freedom of navigation operation in progress, 5 nautical miles from the convergence point, a Seahawk on the flight deck, and a clear understanding of what documentation was. Documentation was not intervention. Documentation was the record. Bah, Seahawk, launch immediately. 400 feet, position yourself above the Vietnamese vessel's bearing from us. Establish documentation orbit. I want their configuration, the CCG's configuration, and the planned frigate's configuration on camera before any of them reach the convergence point. The Seahawk launched at 10:20 a.m. CPA to convergence point, 17 minutes at current speeds. At 10:21 a.m., Channel 16 opened from the CCG vessel, in Mandarin first, then English. All vessels in the Shisha Islands area. This is the China Coast Guard conducting patrol operations in Chinese sovereign territorial waters. All foreign military and government vessels are required to notify Chinese authorities and obtain permission prior to entering Chinese territorial waters. This notification is addressed to the Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel bearing 035 from our position and to the United States military vessel to the northeast. Both vessels are in Chinese territorial waters and are required to depart or obtain prior permission. Both vessels named. The CCG broadcast was addressing the Vietnamese vessel and the U.S. destroyer simultaneously, the 2 non-Chinese government vessels in the area. The U.S. destroyer was named explicitly. The Vietnamese vessel was identified by bearing. The captain did not respond on Channel 16. At 10:22 a.m., the Seahawk pilot's first report, Bridge Seahawk. I have all 3 contacts visual and on camera. Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel bearing 155 from you, range 7.5 nautical miles, medium cutter, approximately 2,400 tons. Vietnamese flag visible. Standard deck configuration, no unusual equipment visible. CCG vessel bearing 235, range 6.8 nautical miles, Haijing 5302, 3,400 tons. I can see the water cannon installation on the forward deck. It is in its resting position, not deployed. Planned frigate bearing 038, range 10 nautical miles, type 054A by silhouette. I am recording all 3 continuously. Water cannon in resting position. The CCG had its water cannon, the same category of equipment that had been used against Vietnamese vessels in prior encounters, not yet deployed, but present and visible. CPA to Vietnamese vessel. The Vietnamese vessel was approaching the convergence point and the CCG was approaching from the opposite direction. Their CPA to each other was projected at approximately 200 yards at the convergence point, if both maintained current course and speed. At 10:23 a.m., the captain made his first decision. Come left to course 225. Ahead standard. I want to be 2 nautical miles from the convergence point in 15 minutes. The course change moved the destroyer southwest toward the convergence point, cutting the distance from 5 nautical miles to 2 nautical miles by the time the Vietnamese vessel, CCG, and planned frigate would all be in close proximity. The move was direct and the message it sent was geographic. The U.S. destroyer was repositioning to be present at the convergence, not watching from a distance. 2 nautical miles from the convergence point was documentary range for every sensor on the ship. It was also visible from the CCG's bridge, from the planned frigate's bridge, from the Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel's bridge. as a deliberate repositioning of a U.S. Navy warship to within visual observation distance of what was about to happen. The destroyer's speed increased to 18 knots on the new course. CPA to convergence, 14 minutes. At 10:24 a.m., the fire control radar entered active tracking mode on both the CCG vessel and the PLAN frigate simultaneously, not on the Vietnamese vessel, on the two Chinese government vessels. Both tracking solutions confirmed and held. The CCG vessel's EW equipment received fire control emissions within seconds. The planned frigate, a Type 054A with significantly more capable EW systems than the CCG cutter, would identify the fire control source, the emission type, and the tracking mode within 20 to 30 seconds. Both Chinese vessels now knew that a U.S. Navy fire control radar was tracking them. The fire control radar was not directed at the Vietnamese vessel. The fire control radar was directed at the two vessels that were converging on a third vessel in disputed waters. At 10:25 a.m., the first friction event arrived. The Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel had received the CCG's Channel 16 broadcast and had been monitoring the developing contact picture on its own radar. At 10:25 a.m., it transmitted on Channel 16 in Vietnamese, then in English, with the specific cadence of a message that had been prepared. China Coast Guard vessel and People's Liberation Army. Navy vessel. This is Vietnam Coast Guard operating in Vietnamese sovereign waters of the Hoang Sa Archipelago, as recognized under Vietnamese national law and UNCLOS. We have the right to conduct patrol operations in these waters. We are continuing our transit and will not alter course under pressure from foreign government vessels in Vietnamese territory. Hoang Sa, the Vietnamese name for the Paracels. The Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel had named its claim in both its own language and in English on the International Distress and Safety Frequency. The broadcast would be in every monitoring station's log in the South China Sea. The Vietnamese vessel was not turning away. It was stating its position and maintaining course. All three non-US vessels were going to reach the convergence point. CPA to convergence, 12 minutes. At 10:26 a.m., the CIWS completed its power on and entered passive thermal tracking mode, barrel oriented toward the CCG vessel. At 10:27 a.m., the second friction event arrived through the Fleet Coordination Circuit. 7th Fleet Pacific's duty officer had been monitoring the contact picture and had flagged the tactical situation for the fleet commander's staff. A priority message arrived. 7th Fleet had the picture and was coordinating with the Department of State Vietnam desk and with the U.S. Embassy Hanoi through emergency channels. The State Department was aware. The Vietnamese government had been notified through diplomatic channels that a U.S. naval vessel was observing the encounter in real time. The message to the destroyer included one specific instruction: maintain observational posture and document. Do not interpose U.S. vessel between Vietnamese and Chinese contacts. Document all interactions between non-U.S. parties and provide real-time feed to 7th Fleet. Do not interpose. The instruction acknowledged the impulse. A U.S. warship 2 nautical miles from a situation where the CCG was converging on a smaller Vietnamese government vessel and constrained it. The U.S. role was documentation and presence, not physical intervention between parties, the captain acknowledged. The instruction aligned with his plan. He was 2 nautical miles from the convergence point, not between the vessels. CPA to convergence, 10 minutes. At 10:28 a.m., the Seahawk pilot's second report, Bridge Seahawk. CCG vessel, Haijing 5302 is now at 5 nautical miles from the Vietnamese vessel. I can see the CCG forward deck. The water cannon is still in resting position. I can see crew movement on the CCG forward deck. 2 crew members are near the water cannon platform. I cannot tell if they are preparing the system or performing routine activity. Vietnamese vessel is continuing its southwest transit, no change in heading or speed. Planned frigate is at 8 nautical miles from the convergence and maintaining 16 knots. Crew movement near the water cannon. The same pre-activation pattern that had been visible in the Scarborough Shoal encounter. The CCG crew was positioning near the system before any deployment decision was made. CPA between CCG and Vietnamese vessel, approximately 8 minutes. At 10:29 a.m., the LRAD activated, not directed at the Vietnamese vessel. not directed at the planned frigate, directed at the CCG vessel in Mandarin. China Coast Guard vessel Haijing 5302. This is a United States naval warship operating in international waters of the South China Sea. You are under continuous observation and documentation by this vessel and by aerial surveillance. Your current course will bring you into close proximity with a Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel conducting lawful patrol operations. Any water cannon deployment or physical contact with the Vietnamese vessel will be documented and reported to the U.S. government, to Asian Maritime Coordination, and to international maritime authorities. The documentation of this encounter is being transmitted to 7th Fleet Command in real time. You are on the record. You are on the record. The LRAD broadcast in Mandarin. The specific statement that documentation was real-time and distributed to multiple receivers. The water cannon documentation was named specifically, not any aggressive action, but water cannon deployment or physical contact, the two specific actions in the CCG's tactical library for these encounters. The CCG vessel did not respond on Channel 16. CPA between CCG and Vietnamese vessel, 6 minutes. The Seahawk's camera had been recording continuously. At 10:31 a.m., the pilot reported, "Bridge, Seahawk. I am now at 1 nautical mile above the convergence point. I have all 3 vessels in my camera frame simultaneously. Vietnamese vessel bearing 160 from the convergence point at 2.1 nautical miles, CCG bearing 260 at 2.8 nautical miles, planned frigate bearing 015 at 7.2 nautical miles. I can see the CCG water cannon platform clearly. Both crew members are still near the system. The system appears to be in resting position still, not actively oriented. I am maintaining continuous recording. All 3 vessels in the same camera frame. The Seahawk's aerial documentation at this point contained an overhead view of the full encounter geometry. The U.S. destroyer 2 nautical miles northeast, the Vietnamese vessel, the CCG, and the PLAN frigate, all visible simultaneously. At 10:32 a.m., the CCG vessel reached 1.4 nautical miles from the Vietnamese vessel. The 2 vessels were now approaching each other at a combined closing rate of approximately 22 knots, 14 from the CCG, 8 from the Vietnamese vessel maintaining its course as it had stated on Channel 16. The CCG vessel's water cannon had not been deployed. The crew members near the water cannon platform had not changed their posture, still in proximity to the system, not actively operating it. At 10:33 a.m., the TEL appeared. The CCG vessel began decelerating from 14 knots to 10 knots over 2 radar sweep cycles. The combined closing rate with the Vietnamese vessel dropped from 22 to 18 knots. The captain noted it and said nothing. At 10:34 a.m., the CCG vessel altered course 2 degrees north. The course change was minimal. 2 degrees would not dramatically change the CPA between the CCG and the Vietnamese vessel, but it moved the CCG's track slightly north of its previous heading, creating a marginal increase in the projected passing distance. The course change, combined with the speed reduction, produced a revised CPA projection from the original 200 yards to approximately 300 yards. The CIC tactical officer reported it, CCG Haijing 5302 altering course. 2 degrees north. Speed now 10 knots. CPA to Vietnamese vessel now projecting 290 yards. Opening. CPA between CCG and Vietnamese vessel, 290 yards. The convergence was still happening. The CCG and Vietnamese vessel were going to pass within 290 yards of each other. But the CCG had reduced its approach speed and made a minimal course adjustment that created slightly more distance. The water cannon was not deployed. The 2 crew members near the system were still present, but the system remained in resting position. The blink came in 3 layers. On the radar display, CCG speed continuing to drop from 10 to 8 knots, the 2 vessels' closing rate falling further. Then, FLIR on the CCG forward deck from the Seahawk. The 2 crew members near the water cannon platform had stepped away from the system. The Seahawk pilot noted it at 10:34:40 a.m. CCG forward deck crew have moved away from the water cannon platform. Then, the planned frigate at 10:35 a.m., the Type 054A, which had been maintaining 16 knots on its southbound track, reduced speed to 10 knots, the first speed change from the planned vessel since it had begun its approach at 10:17 a.m. CCG crew away from the water cannon. CCG decelerating. Plan frigate decelerating. The coordinated three-platform demonstration had reached the moment where the documentation environment, U.S. destroyer at 2 nautical miles, fire control radar tracking both Chinese vessels, a Seahawk with all 3 vessels in frame, real-time feed to 7th Fleet, LRAD broadcast in Mandarin naming the water cannon specifically, had produced behavioral changes in both Chinese government vessels. At 10:36 a.m., the Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel and the CCG vessel passed each other at 310 yards. No water cannon was deployed. No physical contact occurred. The Vietnamese vessel maintained its southwest heading and continued its transit. The CCG vessel, now at 8 knots on its slightly adjusted north track, passed 310 yards north of the Vietnamese vessel. The planned frigate held at 5.8 nautical miles north of the convergence point and continued to decelerate. By 10:38 a.m., it was at 6 knots and effectively holding position. At 10:37 a.m., Channel 16 from the CCG vessel. In English only. United States warship, China objects to your presence and interference in Chinese sovereign waters. Your surveillance of China Coast Guard operations is noted. China will respond to these actions through appropriate diplomatic channels. Your surveillance is noted. China objects. Diplomatic channels. The CCG's Channel 16. Closing statement was the specific language of a government vessel completing an encounter it had not fully executed. Acknowledgement that the U.S. presence had been observed. Reservation of diplomatic response. No claim that the encounter had proceeded as intended. The captain transmitted on Channel 16 in English. China Coast Guard vessel and People's Liberation Army Navy vessel. This vessel has been conducting a lawful freedom of navigation operation in international waters of the South China Sea. The encounter between your vessels and the Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel has been fully documented. The documentation has been transmitted to U.S. 7th Fleet Command, to ASEAN Maritime Coordination, and to the State Department. The record of this encounter is complete. The record is complete. He set down the handset. No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment. The Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel continued its southwest transit. By 10:45 a.m., it was 4.2 nautical miles past the convergence point, continuing toward its patrol area in the Paracel western approach. It did not transmit on Channel 16 following the passing. The Seahawk recovered to the flight deck at 10:48 a.m., having documented the full encounter from the moment of launch through the pass and the withdrawal of all Chinese vessels. The helmsman was at the new course 225, speed reduced to 14 knots as the tactical situation resolved. He had held the approach course to the 2 nautical mile observation position with the same precision he applied to any standing order. The course had been the course. The officer of the deck looked at the radar display. CCG vessel at 4.1 nautical miles and opening west. Planned frigate at 7.2 nautical miles and opening north. Vietnamese vessel at 5.8 nautical miles, continuing southwest. 3 vessels separating in 3 directions from a convergence point that had been the center of the South China Sea at 10:36 a.m. He straightened his collar. The captain walked to the chart table. The encounter report would go to 7th Fleet to Indo-Pacific Command, to the State Department Asia Bureau, and through the Embassy Hanoi, as a notification to the Vietnamese government that the encounter had been documented, and the documentation was available through appropriate diplomatic channels. The Seahawk's continuous aerial footage was the primary intelligence product. An overhead view of a CCG vessel approaching a Vietnamese Coast Guard patrol cutter in the Paracels, with all phases of the encounter, approach, deceleration, passing, withdrawal, in the same continuous recording. Full encounter report to 7th Fleet and Indo-PACOM. Seahawk footage archive is priority product. Fire control radar activation log on CCG and planned frigate with timestamps. All Channel 16 transcripts including Vietnamese broadcast, CCG broadcast, and planned frigate behavior log. Embassy Hanoi notification, standard diplomatic format, include the Seahawk footage summary and offer to share documentation through State Department channels. He looked at the chart. The freedom of navigation operation had 12 nautical miles of woody island perimeter remaining. Resume freedom of navigation transit pattern. Continue the operation. Good watch. The record assembled here speaks in the language the ocean keeps. One China Coast Guard vessel, Haijing 5, 302, 3,400 tons, and one Plan Type 054A frigate executed a coordinated convergence approach toward a Vietnamese Coast Guard patrol vessel transiting the Paracel Island area at 10:17 a.m. The CCG vessel approached to a projected CPA of 200 yards with water cannon in resting position and crew members positioned at the water cannon platform. U.S. destroyer course changed to 2 nautical mile observation position. Yes, at 10:23 a.m. Fire control radar activated in tracking mode on CCG and planned frigate. Yes, at 10:24 a.m. CIWS passive tracking. Yes, from 10:26 a.m. Seahawk launched for aerial documentation. Yes, at 10:20 a.m. LRAD broadcast in Mandarin, naming water cannon specifically. Yes, at 10:29 a.m. CCG deceleration. Tell from 14 knots to 10 knots at 10:33 a.m. CCG course change 2 degrees north. Yes, at 10:34 a.m. CCG forward deck crew stepped away from water cannon. Yes, at 10:34:40 a.m. Planned frigate deceleration. Yes, at 10:35 a.m. Actual CPA between CCG and Vietnamese vessel, 310 yards. Water cannon deployed? No. Physical contact between CCG and Vietnamese vessel? No. Vietnamese Coast Guard vessel sustained course throughout? Yes. Vietnamese Channel 16 broadcast asserting Hoang Sa claim? Yes, at 10:25 a.m. U.S. Channel 16. Transmission 2. LRAD broadcast at 10:29 a.m. Documentation completion statement at 10:37 a.m. CCG Channel 16. Response 1 closing broadcast noting U.S. presence and reserving diplomatic response. 7th Fleet real-time monitoring, yes. State Department coordination, yes. Embassy Hanoi notification authorized, yes. Fire control radar on Vietnamese vessel, 0. The fire control radar was directed at the vessels that were converging, not at the vessel being approached. Course alterations by U.S. destroyer after repositioning, 0. Freedom of navigation operation continued. Yes, the Paracels were administered by China in January 1974 and have been administered by China since. Vietnam's claim has not changed. The CCG and planned frigate came to manage that gap with the specific instruments they had used before: water cannon, close approach, radio demands, in waters where those instruments had worked before. At 10:20 a.m., a Seahawk launched. At 10:24 a.m., a fire control radar activated on the approaching vessels. At 10:29 a.m., a voice in Mandarin named the water cannon by name. The crew stepped away from the system at 10:34 a.m. The Vietnamese vessel passed at 310 yards. The crew stepping away was its own kind of record.